What's up, guys? Ben here bringing you another video today. We are continuing our CDL Call of Duty Champs Preview video series. We're going to talk a little about the London Royal Ravens. Interesting journey for them so far this season. We're going to go ahead and we're going to recap it. Talk a little about their map and mode record, the KDs, where the stats lie. Talk about where they're playing well, where they're struggling. Give some tips on things they need to improve going into the tournament. And then from there, we'll give our prediction on where we think they will place. Let's dive in. So it's been a weird couple of years for this London team since the start of CDL, right? They had like a pretty good first year in the league, top four. I don't think a lot of people saw that coming. The Cold War was like a year to forget for them. They had a couple of different versions of rosters. Paulette, Sean, Dill. I mean, I could just sit there and just name different players. It was not great. They ended up really kind of placing at the bottom of the Cold War season. So going into Vanguard, I think the biggest thing for them was Trey Zero coming back, being available for selection after visa stuff. They brought in a couple of young players, Nasty and Gismo. They're really promising EU products. And after a really good first rookie season in the CDL, Afra was back to continue his reign and really took a step forward this season, and we'll get to that later in the video. So London actually had a really super hot start to the season on the first two majors, 4-1 in the first qualifier. Their only losses against LAG, but they played well against like a good set of teams that were playing well at the beginning of the season: Florida, Minnesota, Optic, Texas, and Seattle. And they pulled up to major one at ESA and actually played pretty good in Arlington, right? So they beat LAG in a game 5, beat a really good Toronto team that was just coming off a kickoff classic dub in the second round of winners. So they were already top 3 at that point, like a real surprise, I think, on a lot of people's brackets. FaZe was dumped down to losers after they got reverse swept in the previous other side of the winners round 2. So Optic Texas came in and took care of business against London in game 4. And then unfortunately London got rounded after that. FaZe had a little bit of a mini losers bracket run, and they took care of London pretty handily on Sunday afternoon. And not really a bad first showing from London, right? Like top 3, beat a bunch of good teams. Like, okay, this team might actually be a contender this year. And they kept it going again in major 2. We're playing really good online once again, 4-1 in overall series counts. Again, a top seed going into the Minnesota event. Only losses against a strong FaZe team, but they beat Boston, they beat Thieves, they beat New York, and they beat Paris. This is a little bit of an up and down major for London. I know the team has talked about this is sort of the start of some of the issues that Gismo was having, and we'll get to that in a second. They lost to Florida on the first day of the tournament. They were able to take care of business against Paris, but they got dumped by eventual winners LAG and losers round 2, and unfortunately they didn't get any farther than top 8 this tournament. They're going in the Pro-Am Classic in Columbus. They end up making a switch. Gismo goes back to EU for a sec. They bring in Harry, another really young player with a lot of momentum and buzz behind him, but they really struggle at Pro-Am with their new squad. Again, in retrospect, you look at this group and, you know, they did get a tough one. Like the team that finished first and the team that finished second at this event were in their group. And London's only win in this group was against War, but they really struggled against Thieves and New York, and they did not qualify for the bracket stage of this tournament. And Major 3 with Harry didn't go much better. 1-4, like starting to think, oh, this team might be in trouble, right? They had a decent amount of points after the first 2 events, so they were always still in those champ spots, but you're starting to think, oh, this team might slip and maybe not qualify for champs if they have another real couple of tough majors here to close out the second half of the season. Their only win in the online portion of the stage was against Paris, but that was a tough game 5er. They pulled up to Toronto. They are able to take care of business against a New York team that still hadn't won a series on land at this point, so okay. But they end up getting 3-0 by Texas, and their run at Toronto then is really short. Top 8, not really losing ground on a bunch of the bubble teams, but still sort of not continuing that progression they had from the beginning of the year. All right, so we get the little bit of break between Major 3 and 4. We get a little buzz. Gizmo's coming back. The squad's getting back together. And look, they're under a little bit of pressure now. Again, as we discussed, like, they're not yet really locked in for champs. They still have some work to do, and they have a great start to the Major 4 cycle. They go 4-1. Their only losses against LAG in a game 5, but they beat FaZe, they beat Florida, they beat Minnesota, and they beat Toronto. So a bunch of teams that were playing pretty good during the stage as well. At this point, their champ spot pretty much locked. They didn't play all particularly good at Major 4 event in New York. They lost to Toronto in a game 5. They lost to LAG in a game 5. So no series win for them, but they were able to qualify for champs. And as we see here, they're coming in this event with the 4th seed overall in front of Seattle, Boston, Toronto, and New York. But like from a map record standpoint or mode record standpoint, a little bit better than both those 4 squads because they're above 500 in both game win record and map win record, but it's still pretty close. Like the London team we thought was going to be like a clear top 3 or top 4 team. I don't know if I necessarily feel that way going into this tournament. I think I'd put them as sort of the tier below some of the contenders, and let's really talk about it. So let's talk maps and modes. There's a lot to like here and a lot to dislike. So Hardpoint, you look at that pretty gaudy record, 32 22-23. Amongst all teams in the league, the only teams that were better than them this point in hardpoint were FaZe and Optic. So it's a really good company to be in. So they've been better than Thieves in New York, who are other top hardpoint teams. So I think some of London's struggles in the other game modes, and we'll get to it, have been really like buoyed by the fact that they've been a pretty solid hardpoint team throughout this run. S&D, as you see, not too bad. Map pool's actually kind of weird in S&D for them, right? They've been really good on Bocage. It's the Afro show, especially in Major 4. And Desert Siege is by far and away their best map. They've been a lot of really good S&D teams on that map. But they've been kind of iffy on Berlin. They played it a lot in the beginning of the season, kept playing it and kept losing it. So people are like, WTF. And they've had zero success on Tuscan this year. It's basically been their auto veto at this point. So looking at those maps, like, I think it's navigatable, but you know, you're going to see a lot of Berlin Bocage against some of the top teams, because I don't think teams are going to want to screw up with them on Desert Siege. London's going to get rid of Tuscan, then you're good to go from there. But I think what we really got to talk about, and the one thing that's limiting the ceiling of this team right now, is control. So with Harry in Major 3, they were 2-5 in control, and you would think Gismo coming back, then maybe they get better. No, they've actually gotten worse. They've only won one control this entire major. That was during the actual LAN tournament itself online. Like, they couldn't win a lick of control, and I think it's a huge problem for them. We're talking about, like, if you're London, right, and really the bar that you need to set in order to get deep on the weekend is you're gonna have to be probably a Thieves, Optic, or a FaZe. All three of those are really good control teams. Essentially, not having the ability to win that third game mode is really handicapping you. And I think you saw this kind of come into play on two of the last three series the team has played. So the last series they played online against an LAG team that had sort of an interesting up and down part in Major 4. It looked pretty good for London. Like, obviously the first two maps were close, but LAG grabbed the momentum on the map 3 because of London's struggles on control. LAG went a close hard point, and they closed out in the S&D. And the same thing kind of happens against a Toronto team, right? Close first two maps. You're feeling good if you're London, you're up 2-0, but you get 3-0 smoked again on control. All momentum's out the window. Yeah, you keep the hard point close, but they blow you out in that Bocage S&D. That's my concern point for London. If they want to get past top 8 and top 6 of this event, they're going to have to get better at control. So there's one other area I think London's going to also have to improve going this event. We take a look at the overall KDs here. Shout out Easy Mac for the sheet. And it looks pretty good across the board. Obviously, Harry's numbers are not that great, but he's not in the lineup at this point. Nasty with that 0.96. It's not amazing, but again, plenty of teams are won with someone dropping a 0.95. And then we got to tip Afro with the 103 and running a sub. That's amazing. Afro's going to be a free agent upcoming here, and like is clearly a top 5 sub in the game, if not top 3 sub, and has had a phenomenal season. And you look at Gismo and Trey, and you're like, this is great. Trey's at time has struggled with inconsistencies from series to series, but that's been his thing for a minute. The Gismo thing is really interesting, right? You look at it, 500 player, 1-0. Everything's kind of sunshine and rainbows. You can work around that. But I saw this Reddit thread a week or so ago, and it kind of blew my mind, right? Gismo's been really good online, but he's really struggled in the lands. And it's almost a discrepancy of about like 0.25 KD, which is actually a pretty substantial number if you think about it, right? Stage 1, 1.2, he's like number 1 in KD, but he's a real stinker at Major 1. Again, top KD online in Major 2, but struggles again in Major 2, and he's sort of at sort of the bottom half in KD. And then the last major that he did play, Major 4, again, solid online. They dropped a 0.85 in the 2 series they played in Major 4. So like, look, Gizmo's a young player. They're going to have their ups and downs. They got to feel it out. But this trend is not particularly good for Gismo. And one key thing for him to work on this event, and again, if you can't overcome it this season, like this is the key thing for him going to next season, because he's super young and super talented, is figuring out what are you doing differently when you're going to LAN? Like what is causing these issues, right? Are you switching up your routine, for example? Or are you doing things different than you would do online? How do you get into that same mindset once the bright lights in the crowd are in front of you? Because if they get to Gismo they played online, I really like their chances in some upsets, and we'll take a look at the bracket in a second. But if he's going to sit there and drop a 0.85, like this team's going to be out before Saturday. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about their bracket and their chances here. So they're going to score up first match, first day of the event, the Seattle Surge, a team that's also had a little bit of an interesting journey this season. And I would say of sort of the 8 teams that we have listed here, probably the one that's coming in on the least greatest form at the moment. These teams have played twice this year, and it was pretty even across the board. But I should note that both the time they played in Major 1 and in Major 3 were both during the online stages, so these teams haven't played an actual LAN match versus each other this year. So I take a look at the views here, and it actually lines up pretty good for London if you think about it. We know that Seattle, when they've been good in form, have been an amazing Tuscan hardpoint team. It's a strong suit for London as well. And London's not good at Bocage, and I don't think London's going to score up with them on a map where Pred just basically drops 40 every time he plays, so I see that hardpoint not happening at all. We're probably getting like some combo of Berlin, Gav, and Tuscan here, which if you're London you feel pretty good about. S&Ds are probably going to be pretty 50-50 in this one. Tuscan S&D I see as kind of an auto veto for London. So London, I think if this goes kind of either way, I think you're probably getting at least one of your good S&D maps, and you may be a kind of a bonus map in Berlin S&D. Controls, I don't think we're going to get a Tuscan control if I'm London. That's probably Seattle's best control. I'm getting it out of there. That's where Dante drops 45 every map he plays. A little bit of exaggeration, but that guy is pretty good on that map. Same with Pred. So you're probably getting a Gav or Berlin. Do you look to yourself and you're like, well, this kind of really favors London for the vetoes, but here's my thing. I think like experience plays a big key part of champs. I really think that the Seattle team doesn't have a high ceiling at this event, but I like their potential chances to maybe get something going against London. This is a really 50-50 series for me. I think it goes game 5 and could really go either way. The problem for either team though is I don't really see them, if they win, being FaZe or New York. I think those are much stronger teams. And if it goes to the flip side as well, like if you lose this series, you're playing either FaZe or New York in losers round 1. So for London, I think it's critical that you win this first series. Otherwise, I think the likelihood of you getting top 8 this tournament is super high. But if you do end up actually winning this match, you get kind of that bonus series against a FaZe or New York. You're going to kind of play a team from the bottom side. Maybe get lucky and that's like a Toronto Ultra type situation. Someone where you could maybe put them away a little bit better in the respawns and just have a good S&D map and close them out early in the series. So I would actually give London ceiling probably like a top 4, honestly, especially if Gismo plays well. But it's like one of those things where I also think their ceiling is super low, where they can pull up this event and be super uncompetitive and get like essentially last, top 8. But I really don't see, I think like ceiling's top 4. I just don't see them unless they come to this event and they're a completely different team, beating FaZe, New York, Thieves, Optic, who I think are like clearly the top 4 teams to beat right now at this tournament. And even Toronto is a difficult series for them. But again, as I just highlighted, like the respawns are probably where they have a little bit of an edge on Toronto. It's just neither team's great at kind of finishing these series at land, so who knows. And so yeah, that'll do it. I think like my final thoughts on London are, look, if you end this year as a top 8, top 6, it wasn't the worst year. Obviously, you'd love to have another top 4 like you did the first year of CDL. And we'll talk about a bit in their off-season video, kind of after champs. But this is going to be a huge off-season for London. They have a lot of players that are going to be free agents, so you might see a completely different London roster next season if they don't really see a lot of success in this tournament. And guys, let me know what you think in the comments, right? Do you agree with me? Do you think London's sort of not in the top tier of teams of this tournament? Do you think maybe they might surprise people? Gismo might come good and they might have a good land run. Let me know in the comments what you think. And as always, if you like this video, please subscribe. We're putting out videos all week as a preview to champs as well as content after champs, so stay tuned for that. And as always, guys, we'll see you in the next one.